Much easier. Technology. Thank you.
What do we do with audio?
What?
Light?
Oh,
There's two lights.
yeah.
Sorry, I was wondering what it is with the mic. There's two.
I have a loud voice.
Well,
and-
we got two of these.
Okay. Catch it to me.
There's also one of these.
Celebrity stuff.
That comes through the speaker system, be pretty loud.
Oh.
Is that you or me? Hello? Do you need yours? I don't need mine. Oh, this one was thinking.
If you want. Back in the drawer.
5 minutes to stir. Which means I'm gonna go coffee.
No, always not. Was it what? Recruiter, I like it. Good morning. Good morning. How's it going? Going all right. Yeah. All right. Wow. That's ridiculous. How are you? Hey, good. We got introduced to a really neat bar, I guess, restaurant, where they had like all kinds of games and we played basketball and what kind of thing where we could play. Oh, okay. Oh my God, it was fun. We used to have something like that in Ottawa and closed down 2 years ago, and it was sad. And then yesterday we were like, oh, this is so long. It was really good. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. Oh.
Oh, and I'm like, let's recruit, but Sunday after St. Patty's Day.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, they'll stroll in around 1 p.m. Yeah, I think so. Did you have a beard yesterday?
Yeah, Agile beard.
That's so funny. I'm looking at
Yeah, the facial hair exchange. It's funny. I'm kind of the same way. I'll wake up one morning. I'll be like, what's on my face? And like, just have to freshly shave. And then about a week later, my girlfriend will say I look like a baby. So then I got to grow back out. Yeah. And I flip flop between the facial hair and the no facial hair.
I used to tell people the only thing I hated worse was shaving and having a beard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes and then we'll kick off.
Writing on the board was like
Yeah.
the treat.
But only chalkboards. I can't do whiteboards.
No.
Yeah, no. It is.
Yeah.
I was the same way. The thing that I'm bothered by now is the chalkboards aren't
Yeah. Just it all. Yeah, I even have the thing to try and clean it off. It's harder.
Mhm.
Actually, I had a teacher that used to take that creative fun. He would always dip it in water and then write, and then when it would go on the board, it would be like it wouldn't be there. And then it would write off. So it was just like a minute or so.
Kind of wild trick, magic trick.
Do I want to be a teacher?
This is actually her regular handwriting. Your H needs something in the middle. It looks weird. He's like a hole, isn't it? I don't know. There's something. Much better. Should we kick it off? My red pen. Awesome. And then we'll start the show. First off, thank you guys for having us today. We're from Ottawa. We're from an agency called Open. So we're headquartered in Ottawa. We work a lot in Canada. It's our actually first time at the Nerd Summit. It's been amazing. The quality of presentations, setting the bar really high. I think we're definitely coming back next year. And we were at the Hangar last night, which is probably the most fun club I've been to. Club, bar, whatever, but I've been to in a while. Today, Andrea and I have a presentation for you called Our Transformation to Agile. It's kind of a story of how our agency moved from having no project management at all into a waterfall project management approach, the challenges we figured out with Waterfall, and then from there, how we then transformed into Agile. The goal of our presentation is that if you work within an organization or you are the head of a team or a product team or something like this, and you're looking to move into Agile, or perhaps you're already Agile and having some challenges, we're hoping to talk to you about the challenges we've had so you don't have to learn everything the hard way like we did. It was an interesting ride all the way through. So, today what we're going to do is we're going to give you a little bit of a background about project management. Just, how did project management evolve from over 100 years ago to where we are today, where we have Scrum, we have Agile, and all these other methodologies. And then from there, we're going to dive into a little bit of history around our own transformation. And finally, the format of the presentation is going to be, I'm going to throw out a bunch of challenges. Andrew's going to throw out a bunch of solutions. It's a lot like our day-to-day in the office, to tell the truth. And we're just going to go through, about 10 different big challenges that we faced together as we were transforming to Agile. And then we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. It's such an interesting topic, and we find that this project management methodology, it's practiced differently from organization to organization, and everyone has different challenges. So we're here to answer any of your questions, if we can, to the best of our advice. So before we jump into things, I just wanted to do a handful of quick introductions. So my name is Chris Smith. I founded Open 6 years ago now. Before that, I was a consultant with Rational, the IBM Rational team. Did a lot of work in the public sector, doing quality assurance management, eventually moved into project management before I created Open. And now, at Open, I've had the opportunity to become certified. I'm a certified Scrum Master, certified product owner, certified associate project management through the PMI as well. I really believe that project management is a game changer for any organization, any team, in terms of its effectiveness, in terms of risk mitigation, in terms of controlling your constraints, and really meeting the objectives at the end of the day. So I'm pretty passionate about this. It kind of oozes through my, out of me sometimes as I get going. And I do this talk or similar talks quite often across North America. So trying to share my passion with everyone else that shares it with me. Then Andrea, maybe a quick intro on your side.
My name is Andrea. I have been a PM for about 10 years now. I've worked in the industry of digital software this entire time in my career. I've been with Open for about 3 years, where I did also have the opportunity to get my PMP, Scrum Master, certified Scrum Master, as well as a product owner. But in the end, now I'm in the role of director of operations. So I work with our team and make sure that their processes, their day-to-day, and their experiences, their output is as smooth and efficient as possible. So I get to work with them, which is really fun. It's kind of taking a bird's eye view and putting in for the day-to-day.
Mhm. So tell us about yourself, guys. Out of curiosity, how many of you work in a small organization, less than 10 people? Let's say 10 to 50 people, 50 to a couple hundred. Anyone in those like global thousands, like 1,000 plus? Okay, awesome. Any project managers in the room? Product owners, product requirement gatherers, business analysts?
Some projects. Well, that's
That's fair. It happens often.
Yeah.
Any developers? Awesome. So we have a good demographic. Absolutely. Okay, so why don't we get moving forward? I think that this talk is going to apply to everyone, regardless of your role, regardless of the size of your organization. If you're interested in Agile, Scrum, any of these types of development or project management methodologies, I think you guys are going to take something away for sure. So moving on, before I really jump into the challenges and we start talking about how we overcame them, I want to give you a bit of background project management from what we did at our agency. Then I want to talk about project management just overall, how it's evolved over 100 years, and then we'll move on from there. So, you know, I mentioned our agency is young. We're about 6 years old, and in the first couple of years, it was actually just me and like 7 of my frat bros. We decided to create a company, and it felt pretty casual, right? We had a handful of developers, and me and another friend, we were in charge of sales. And basically, we were just doing whatever we could, and we were kind of winging it in a lot of ways. We had the base skill sets required to deliver simple applications on top of Drupal. We had the ability of developing custom themes and doing all that kind of work. But at the end of the day, what we found is our projects became more complex. We started getting a little bit more success. Our referrals started helping us open doors into new accounts. And then as we started working with bigger government agencies and organizations and enterprises, we realized that all of a sudden we had to mature and we had to grow. Do any of you work in a situation today where you don't have a project manager on your team? Okay, interesting. So that's where we were. And at that point in time, I kind of call it like the Wild West in a lot of ways, right? Our clients would call us with demands and we would just jump on them right away. We were essentially completely working ad hoc. And we always had a rough idea in terms of when things were due and what expectations were. We were kind of documenting things in Basecamp a little bit, but not a lot, right? And as our clients became more complex and started pressuring us to get our stuff together, basically what we decided to do was hire a first project manager. It was actually a really interesting culture shift because we were going from a super casual, laid back approach to all of a sudden everyone was super concerned. They were coming to me saying, Chris, I'm afraid that I might have to actually start working at work, right? And what is this manager going to do? And I'm going to be like micromanaged every day. And the concerns were just spewing out of them, right? And but at that point, we did realize that we had to introduce some sort of formality to our projects. We had to introduce some sort of communication standard to our clients. And basically, we had to become accountable for delivering our projects on time and on budget and relatively within the scope of what our clients were actually expecting. So for bringing a project manager in, we were able to start taking those first steps forward. Where we started in terms of project management at the beginning, I would say was fairly ad hoc, but then naturally you tend to fall into a framework that everyone here probably refers to or knows as Waterfall, because intuitively it makes sense, right? Well, I'm going to start the project by gathering as much information as possible. I'm going to move to that next phase where then I'm going to lay the infrastructure out, and then I'm going to go to site building. In the Drupal world, we go to site building and like information architecture, and you would just naturally progress stage to stage to stage until the very end when you're doing a deployment. We're going to talk a little bit later about why that process was not as effective as it should have been. But that's where we ended up starting. And it was quite an interesting story to hear the concerns come out as we picked out our first PM, but it was definitely not as scary as everyone thought it was going to be. We hired a great project manager, and she actually transformed the company quite significantly and set the foundation for where we went from there.
Before you move on, as a PM, you stats the PM's core that I want to share because I think it really speaks to the need for PM. So there was an article from News Weekend into a project. So it mentioned that project management decreased failed projects by 31%. It delivered 30% of projects under budget. It demonstrated a 21% improvement in productivity. It delivered 19% of projects ahead of schedule. It saved companies an average in US dollars about $567,000 per project. Pretty impressive. And as a PM.
So I like to talk about where we go. You know, Jeff did an amazing session yesterday. He gave us a great background on the history of computing. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on the history of project management. We really started to see project management get documented around 1917. What was happening in the world around 1917? World War I was happening, absolutely. And around World War I, we start to develop these methodologies in order to get the food, like the food rations, to the troops in the field. And then we had to find a way to be as effective as possible in doing so. And what they actually developed was a mechanism where they said, okay, well, let's get all the food products organized. Let's get them in huge crates. Let's get them into the trucks. We're going to ship them out in groups, and we're going to get them to the field on time so that the troops are going to have the food that they need. And essentially what they ended up creating at that time was the first waterfall method, and they invented the Gantt chart, where they could actually map out all the steps and processes required for actually pulling this off as effectively as need be. So in 1917, World War I created the need for us to be more organized, and it created this waterfall Gantt chart methodology. Now, I always think that's pretty interesting because now we're fast forward over 100 years now. Yeah, over 100 years. And we're still seeing the same tools used in World War I to get the troops food being used in software development, right? Really, really makes you scratch your head. In 1957, we had a project management methodology created called Critical Path. Critical Path was a really interesting approach to project management because what they said is that every project has a minimum viable product. You know, the aspects of a project that need to happen in order for the project to be successful, and that's where all the time and effort are going to be spent. And once the critical path was accomplished, then we can look at the nice to haves. And we start to see the aspects of critical path kind of evolve in other frameworks as we move forward. And I think you're going to see a lot of these kind of older dated project management frameworks have now come together. So critical path was one of them. In 57 as well, we also saw something called PERT, P-E-R-T, and it actually had a kind of a different methodology. Instead of looking at the critical path and saying what's the minimum for success, they said that we would be better if we just looked at all the tasks that had to be accomplished and assign estimates to it. And through those estimates, we could begin to manage our constraints and prioritize and so on. So then in 57, we see this formal project management around estimation take form. In 1965 in Vienna, the Europeans, they actually accredited project management. So it hasn't actually been all that long since project management became a career that people could actually study and become professionals in. In 1969, in 69, PMI, the Project Management Institute here in North America, they formed their own accreditation as well. So some of you might be familiar with the PMP, which Andrea is certified project management professional, or the certified associate project management. Anyway, all that to say, North America in 69, they decided that project management was also going to become accredited and a career. In 84, we saw the theory of constraints. The theory of constraints basically says, I don't want to get this wrong, that we need to remove any sort of constraints or hindrances in our project on a regular basis to essentially create the most effective project possible. So people started thinking, well, or asking their employees and asking their teams, well, what's in your way and what can we remove? And if we can do that, then we're going to start to see more success in projects. In 1986, we saw Scrum. And not really the Scrum that we know today, but there are a lot of similarities. Scrum in 1986 came out of a natural need for recognizing that things in software were different. Let's just put it that way. I mean, we recognize that, you know, the same techniques we were using in the war in 1917 were not as effective when it came to software development. And because of that, Scrum said, well, we need to create small teams, and they need to be highly collaborative, and they need to be fast action, and they need to be results driven. So we start to see small software development teams getting created and Scrum becoming a little bit more popular inside the software development world, starting in '86. And then around 2001, there's a group of software engineer professionals that all kind of locked themselves in a resort in Utah. I think that's how the story goes. But basically, they were so frustrated with how project management and software development were going at the time that they said, let's all get together and let's put our brains together and come up with a whole brand new set of values, principles to project management for software based on everything we've learned over the last 100 years and come up with a framework that works for software uniquely. And that's where they came up with the Agile Manifesto. Andrea's going to talk to that in a little bit. But I've always thought that that 100-year evolution is so interesting because we see the theory of constraints and we see PERT and we see critical path all coming together, or aspects of those coming together to create modern project management frameworks today that we're going to be talking about. So transformation to Agile. So I mentioned earlier that, early on when we adopted project management, we were a waterfall organization. And for a year, probably 2 years, things were pretty okay. Our clients were actually happy that we were better organized. We were communicating more frequently. We were getting closer to hitting our deadlines, but we were certainly missing the constraints from time to time. But overall, we were mitigating against risk more so than we were before in the Wild West. But we also had a lot of challenges. We were finding that we were getting to the end of projects, and what do you do at the end of a software project? You typically do your testing, your QA. You got your deployment, which dictates whether or not you're going to go live or not. You have your release management process. You have all those things that you would put in place to make sure that you're actually delivering a product that's high quality, on time, and within some sort of like respectable governance, right? And in this model where we were focusing on discovery and phase and phase and phase, we were essentially burning through all the resources available and all the time that we had available to us early on in the project. And when it came time to test or do proper release management, that's what got cut out of the project first, right? So we ran out of money, which meant we ran out of time to test. And then we were delivering products that were full of defects and bugs. Any clients listen to this, we've now fixed it. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. But at that time with Waterfall, we found that what happened is some of the most critical aspects of our project were being pushed to the very end. And because of that, we had a lot of risk at the end of our projects. And it was also the time when the constraints were the most tight. So we had to figure out somewhere to go. We had to find a better approach. And what we realized, especially because even at that time, our clients were fairly mature, they got even more complex downstream. The expectations got higher. Competition in our little world is pretty high. So we had to become better at what we did. And from there, that's where we started evaluating other frameworks. And we really kind of fell in love with Agile at that point and the concept of it. But I don't think we understood the world of complexities that we were getting into early on at that point in time. So maybe a great time to switch gears and talk a little bit more about Agile and where we went after Waterfall.
And actually, one of the reasons why we chose to go Agile was when we were having conversations about delivering something to clients that was valued, we realized that through the waterfall process, especially with the software development, in the software development world, the definition of what we're meant to accomplish just really changed and adjusted as we went through the project. And so having a framework to allow for change to happen, for the clients to change their mind, for their idea to evolve, that was one of the other reasons I really thought Agile would be a great way to go. So what happened was Chris had found a phenomenal trainer for us, locked us in a room, all the managers for 4 days. We studied and became certified. It was a fantastic 4 years of learning and a lot of ideas coming up. Very shortly after that, we received our project first contract that said we want Agile. Luckily, that was exciting. And we went with it and we started to figure out what we want to do with the process, what we want to do with our team, how we want to interact with the clients. And so today's presentation is about that transformation of figuring it all out on so many different levels. But to start us off, the Agile Manifesto that Chris mentioned. So this is sort of the pillars of what Agile is meant to be as a framework. So we have 4 values that are the starting point for what Agile is meant to be. So the first one is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And all that means is we really want to focus on communication and collaboration. How we, what tools we use aren't really the important part. What's important is how the teams involved, whether it's the clients or the developers, how they talk, how they communicate, and how they work through problems in order to deliver something fantastic. The second one is working software over comprehensive documentation. I know personally, I find heavy documentation to not be something that brings value to most of our clients. A lot of clients are really busy, they don't have time to read through it. And so once they have completed software that works, that brings them so much more value than a 10-page document describing how it works. So demonstrating how this functions, you go from here to there, you teach them. That's much more valuable than a piece of paper describing how that works. The third one is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. To me, this stands for teamwork. You can contract something that you originally want at the start of a project, but projects tend to last a long time. So from 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, 10 years, so on. What that document originally created by, which usually isn't even done by the people that are going to be using what you build in the end, there's a huge disconnect. And so working through and discussing, negotiating what you want and how you want it done throughout the project brings so much more value than saying at the start, do this, and no matter what, that's where I want to end up. Because the reality is the change. And the fourth one is responding to change over following a plan. So again, I already mentioned that with a few other points, pretty intertwined, but change happens. Clients do change their mind. And it's wonderful if they change their mind. If they come to us with one idea at the start of a project, we introduce them to probably so many more options, so many more venues to take, and so many different approaches because we're the experts. So we're showing them, things that they may not have thought of. How wonderful is it if they get to change their mind and then they get to adjust to what they originally thought they wanted, but now they're working with us. They realize I have more options. I can do something different. And so this framework allows us to work with them to work through those things. We also have 12 Agile Principles. So I won't go through all of those, but essentially what they're describing is delivering a viable product. The goal is that at the end of each iteration, the client has something that is tangible and it works, and it is exactly what they were looking for. We work through change with them. Again, the word change is very important because it happens, and the framework allows us to work through that change in a way that actually they come out with something they really like, they really need, they really want. And of course, that happens through collaboration. We work with them, we work with our team, and throughout the entire process, there's no surprises. It's what we talked about perhaps 2 weeks ago at the start of the sprint, and now we've delivered it. 2 weeks is a really short period of time, and makes sure that we deliver what they were looking for. And continuous improvement, because we work in shorter periods of time, we have time to reflect and see, okay, what did we do that was awesome? Let's do that again next time. Or this didn't work so well. Let's maybe adjust. And so every 2 weeks, we get an opportunity to improve and to change. So the entire framework is really something that we bought into because we see the value it brings not only to the client, it brings lots of value to the projects that we deliver, and our teams are actually quite happy and excited to work with the framework.
Before we jump on, I wanted to mention a couple things. One is that we do see often organizations that say they're agile, but when you ask them, are you following the principles or the values of agile in the manifesto, they kind of say, ish, right? We're kind of there. We had some interesting conversations yesterday. It was like, yeah, we say we're agile, but our own flavor of agile. And that's one, it's completely fair to have your own flavor, but I think it's actually really important that that flavor of agile embodies those principles and those values still, right? I'll just show of hands here. How many of you today feel like you follow an agile process, or do you follow an agile? That's awesome.
Ish.
Yeah, absolutely. Ish. My favorite term I've heard thrown around is scrum fall or scrum waterfall or something like that. Like we tend to merge these things together, right? And quite honestly, even our agency was guilty of that early on. We used to say or think that, okay, well, we're going to be highly collaborative and we're going to let our clients change their mind. And, we're going to talk more than we're going to document and things like that. We grabbed a handful of the principles that, in my opinion, were easy to do. And then we went around saying to everyone we were agile. And then, well, we were actually agile-ish in a lot of ways. And what's interesting about being agile-ish is that, when you pick a handful of principles from here and a handful from Waterfall, I very rarely see people picking the parts of Waterfall and Agile and combine them in the best interest of themselves or their client. Typically, what they do is combine the worst parts of both. And then all of a sudden, you're going to your clients and you can't commit on time, you can't commit on budget, and you certainly can't commit on scope. So basically, you're telling the client, kind of have a process. We don't know what's going to come out at the other end, and we're going to talk to you about it the whole way through. So I really do believe that the manifesto lays that foundation for us that you can take these principles, these values, you can create any methodology you want out of it. But I think that you actually have to stay true to this if you actually want to see the value of the methodology.
So in the end, Agile is a framework that it does have different methodologies within the framework. We chose Scrum. So to give you a little bit of background of what Scrum is, it is a framework that follows a sprint cycle. So our sprints are 2 weeks. Within that sprint, we have a few ceremonies. So the ceremonies are simply meetings, and the meetings start with a refinement session where our product owner would start with a requirement that he'd already built out, he or she would build out, and then walk the team through that requirement. So starting point would be, a general statement, a description with some details. And the team then takes that information and looks at it from a technical perspective, breaks it down further, and goes through where tasks are created. So the refinement session is the beginning of the process. And then we go into sprint planning where we decide, okay, the sprint's coming up. We have 2 weeks to do what we got to do. What do we want to include within that sprint? What can we include? We have restrictions maybe on time, perhaps complexity. And so the team decides this is what we commit to. And it's very important that the team commits to that because they are the ones then responsible to deliver. So you create this teamwork, this feeling of we got this, we're going to do this because we decided we can, and here we are. So for 2 weeks, we just go through a development stage where on a daily basis they meet together every morning and they talk about what went right, what went wrong, and what do we need to change. And it's a very good touch point so that we can confirm if we need to fix something or if we learn something, and if further conversations can take place after that morning meeting, they can. But essentially, it's a touch point for everyone to connect. And then we develop. At the end of the sprint, we do 2 very important ceremonies. One is for the client. We show them what we completed. It's a result-based meeting where originally they had told us what they're looking for. Now we can show them what they're looking for, and it's fully completed. If they say, "Yep, you've achieved everything that we wanted to do," it's good to go. They can have it. That's the goal of the sprint, is from top to bottom, tasks are completed and the client has something to walk away with. The second ceremony that's very important is internal. We call it a retro. And the retro is where the team gets together and reviews of what's happened in the past sprint. And this is what I was mentioning earlier, where the team gets to improve every sprint. So the retro allows them to share what happened, how it happened, things that went right, things that maybe didn't go right, and it's starting to create action items for the next day so that we can change, we can improve. It happens over and over and over.
So there's a number of methodologies to choose from. We chose Scrum. You're probably familiar with Kanban, which is more of a continuous flow, less of an iterative flow. We're going to talk about the 10 challenges we had, and I think these challenges apply to the whole Agile Manifesto, those principles, those values, more so than they do Scrum in particular, to tell you the truth. So regardless of the flavor of Agile that you're following at your office, I think a lot of this is going to apply. Like I mentioned earlier, this is going to kind of go challenge, solution, much like it does at the office on a day-to-day. And we've got about 10 main challenges we want to cover with you. over the next kind of half hour here. So our first challenge around, well, maybe I should ask, are there any questions before we jump into challenges and solutions around just like definitions, framework? Okay, cool. Then our first challenge that we want to talk to is about commitment. So this transformation was quite significant. We knew that it was probably going to take a couple of years to adopt Agile, that we were going to end up probably, upsetting a handful of clients as we were figuring things out. We knew that senior management was going to have to make a big investment in this in terms of training, in terms of patience and coaching, and so on. But we also knew that the developers themselves, their job is going to change as well. Instead of coming to work and putting their headphones on for 8 hours, now all of a sudden they had to come to work and be collaborative, and they were going to have to work in a team accountable environment instead of an independent environment where each person was accountable for their own requirements. So all of a sudden, the developers, we needed to get their commitment and their buy-in, and then the senior management, we had to get their buy-in in a completely different aspect. So, Andrea, what did we do to solve that challenge?
So to start off with, we did agree of this is the right way. By agreeing, we also invested into the training, the 4 days locked in the room. That was all the managers, including executives, locked in the room for 4 days. So imagine, there is no deliverable work being completed during this time. That's a huge commitment. And the higher ups committed to that, and that was fantastic. That was our start. So all managers now had this information and understood what they want to do, but they knew they wanted to do this. So now it was time to get everyone else on board to develop for themselves, the development team. And so now the train the trainer approach. We took what we knew and showed them and talked to them about it. But we came prepared. We very much explained why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and also why is this good. And we did really try to provide comfort of this isn't going to be a change. We will work with you. We want to see, how can we do this so that your world isn't turned upside down, and really try to make an environment where learning and adapting to this was comfortable. But most importantly, we wanted to show them the value of this program was bringing. So very early on, if a meeting that we had where they had to share perhaps a technical approach on how they want to address a task, we would let them know, hey, see what's going on, look at the conversation you're having, and look at the value it's bringing, and look how happy the client is at the end of the sprint. So we really wanted to show why we're doing this and how magical. You can feel my passion, but yes.
Make it magical.
It's magical.
You might have saw that in one of those principles, there was a concept of self-organizing teams, and there's a little bit of talk about business value. Actually, there's a lot of talk about business value in the core values of Agile itself. So you have to imagine a situation where when you come to work, you're not actually going to be working on the task that you're the most proficient in. So if you're a back-end developer, you're not just going to come to work and work on module dev all day, but instead you need to identify what is the highest priority business value-wise that we need to focus on. So if you're a back-end developer, but the most high-value item to work on might be, applying the branding and theme to your custom website, your layout or whatnot, then you actually need to pick up that task and work on it. So we're always working in terms of business value and priorities. And because of that, it actually pushes us outside of our nice safety bubble, where if you're specialized in certain areas, now you need to become more generalist in a lot of ways. We call those cross-functional teams, right? Every team needs to be a team of generalists rather than a team of specialists. In your organizations, out of curiosity, are you siloed in terms of your specialty? Like, you have your back-end guy, your migration guy, Yeah, that's fair. So part of aligning with the values and principles, and probably one of the biggest challenges we had, was selling this concept of cross-functional teams. Why don't you share some ideas on it?
Yeah. So first and foremost, transparency was really important in this entire transformation. So we talked to them, and we wanted to see, what is it that you think your expertise is, and is there room to grow your expertise in a maybe broader direction? And so we had those conversations with them, and it wasn't like we said, okay, now you are an expert in this, your secondary skill set is this, go. It was a conversation of, okay, well, here's where we know your strengths are. Let's continue to improve those. here's the next thing you would like to focus on. How can we get you up to speed as best as possible? So whether it's through, like I said, programming, whether it's traditional course, whether it's just mentorship within the skill set that we already have on the team. And we made sure those things were available to them. So as opposed to taking the approach of now you're responsible to know and understand and deliver on so much more, which can be a scary thing. We took it in a direction of let us help you grow and be capable and available to do so much more. And again, showing them the value is where this comes in. For example, we have a team of 4 developers. And if they're picking up a task that they're working on, the next day they are sick, they can't come in, and suddenly this task is at risk. That puts a lot of pressure on the person who is actually sick, and they want to, make sure this happens, but they can't. They're taking care of themselves. Now they know someone else on the team has that skill set or has started that skill set to maybe push that task forward and complete that task. And so the value is you are a team and you do get to work together to complete the entire thing. It's not on you, one person. It is a team. And they found as a team a lot of value in that.
So if you are a module developer or a back-end programmer, you're going to do a few wireframes. And if you're a front-end themer or a designer, you might have to write a little bit of PHP code. But at the end of the day, the value is exactly that. You're now able to operate as a team and hold the team accountable rather than just having all that weight on your shoulders, right? And you can imagine once you get there, the value that that brings to the actual development team. Our third challenge was around business know-how. So, developers don't typically care about the business. That's a broad statement. Not always. Not the corporation that they work for, but I mean the clients themselves. So, in the sales process and the account management process, we want to make sure that we're aligning the services we're providing to maximize the return to our clients. But when it gets to the developers, often they're thinking, well, I've got a technical requirement to implement. How is it that I'm going to make sure that I do that in the way or with the tools that I know how? But in Agile, everyone has an equal say in terms of how we're going to solve the problem. And we're really solving problems that are business problems. We're not solving how are we going to configure that feature, but instead we're saying, how are we going to increase revenue by 2.5%? How are we going to reduce customer support calls by 5%? So the business know-how element or challenge, I should say, is really about how do we get everyone on the development team, developers, product owners, project managers, equally aware of the actual business or client's priorities and objectives so that they can take their own perspective and bring it to the table and help us solve those solutions. And, at least we found in our team that this was not an innate passion or interest. A lot of them were just more interested in the technical aspect of the job. So how do we do it?
Well, every project starts with a discovery session in our agency. So a lot of information is collected at that initial start. And a lot of developers wouldn't join that meeting. It would be the management, product owner most importantly. So as much information as that is collected, we now bring that home and we carve out time to sit with the entire team. And it has to be the entire team. We want to make sure that everyone understands the project from the start. So the PO would now explain at a high level of what are we doing here? Who is this client? What do they want to do? Why did they hire us? What is it that we can help them with? So that information gets shared right off the bat and they understand why. And that's essentially a buy-in. Now they're excited. Who wouldn't be excited to receive a specific client who you get to have an impact on their challenges and you get to solve them through the thing you love, which is, being a software developer. So that's the first step is make sure you include them right off the bat. Make sure they have all that information that the project entails. And then that continues. So the PO has meetings with the client where they collect requirements through each sprint cycle. But then, as I mentioned, we have ceremony called refinement, where the team, again, the entire team sits with the PO. The PO will describe what the task or ask is and what we need to include within that deliverable. But the team themselves now has to think about it that way. It's not the PO doesn't come to the table with a technical plan. That's not how that goes, right? It is a broad statement starting with a story. As a user, I want to do this so that I can achieve that. And this statement is a broad statement. That's what they get. And now they get to think about, okay, well, this is our challenge. business know-how, that's how all their technical planning starts.
Moving on. I just want to ask, do we have to the top of the hour, or are we supposed to stop at quarter or quarter two? We got to speed up a little bit. A little bit, yeah, 5, 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll try to be as respectful as we can on the time. Learning. So this is a project management framework that is really, requires a lot of continuous learning through and through. The developers need to be learning and staying fresh with the technology so that they're providing the best recommendations to solve those business problems. There's also a lot of learning that's required to do up front because the methodology is so fundamentally different from other methodologies, right? How do we learn?
We learned by allowing learning to happen. We relied on each other for the learning to happen. So first and foremost, again, after we were trained, we trained the team. But it did not stop there. We tried to reiterate at every ceremony. Let's say refinement, right? The refinement story, the team creates a technical plan. We would tell them, okay, this meeting has this purpose. This is the outcome we're looking for. And as far as a developer goes, this is the role you play within this meeting. And so we would go through this reminder and this description of what we're trying to do every single time we had a meeting or we had something that they had to get involved in a way that was new. And we just remind them of this is what we're doing. And it really helped as a reminder. But also, we allow them a period of time. It wasn't a set period. We just knew that this isn't going to be a change that happens over time. And so if things weren't going right, it's not that we got upset with them. We actually just brought the media aside and tried to explain a little bit further of what the purpose is and how they need to adjust their, certain behavior to help the process along. And learning wasn't just for the devs. Clients were very much part of it. We had to, at the start of a project, we would help them understand what Agile is. And not Agile at the high level. We try to really be clear of, well, here is the ceremony that happened with the meeting. And this is where you get involved. And as a client, this is the role you play, and this is the outcome we're looking for. So we were training everyone throughout this entire process because everyone was involved. It's about collaboration. So learning started at one point with a big session that continues today.
The role change itself. So our organization, when we were Waterfall and everyone was specialized in doing their own thing, their roles didn't exactly align to the new roles that are defined in Agile. And so our old structure was we had a project manager and we had a technical lead. A technical lead is like your senior architect. It's a person that's going to set out the technical path moving forward, and then was supported by a group of developers. And then those developers were all specialized, back-end, front-end development, and so on. So this was our old structure. And now, as Andrea mentioned earlier, the new Agile structure actually, one, doesn't technically have a PM in it, right? Very interesting problem. Two, they have a product owner, so a business analyst of sorts that has to understand the business requirements and translate those for the developers. And then the development team is meant to become self-organizing and more generalist and no longer independently accountable, but now accountable as a team. So we actually had to change people's jobs. And often we forget that there's actually some corporate stuff that goes on when you do that, right? So tell us a little bit about how we did that.
So we created a gigantic chart. This chart was showing the traditional roles that we had. So I was a PM, my partner was a technical lead, and then we had our developer. And we mapped out roles, skills, that responsibilities that they have per role as the traditional version. And then we decided what role each person should be playing in the new framework. So I, as a PM, became also a PO, and then technically became a Scrum Master and developer, data developer. But perhaps what was happening with the day-to-day or the expectations that changed. And so this information, we mapped it out. It was very clear of who had to do what, and then we shared that information so that everyone understood. And again, we worked through that. The interesting part was that we had an experimentation phase where we tried out these roles and realized it's not quite right. I, as a PM and as a PO, first of all, it was extremely heavy in the time that it required from me, but also it wasn't the perfect So we made a switch. The PM became also the Scrum Master, and then the technical lead became a PO, and the skill sets were much more matched. So through mapping it out, it gave us clarity of what's expected, but also it helped us change to make sure everyone was doing the roles they were meant to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the product owner role, at least in our case, was the most significant change because we're taking essentially a senior architect, very technical, putting them into a role that's more business analyst focused, more business focused. It's not a natural fit for everyone. I think it was the highest risk transition for us. So as you make that change, keep that in mind is that that architect might not actually want to be a product owner. They might want to remain on the development team, and you'll need to find someone with more passion around requirement gathering. We had a challenge around trust. Trust is a challenge in any organization. Ours is particular because we have that concept called the sprint retrospective. You actually need to be able to sit in front of your manager every 2 weeks and tell them how you screwed up openly and how you want to improve. Not everyone feels super comfortable to do that. So we had to find a way of building trust, and not just trust, but like a new level of trust where you could talk to your manager openly about what you needed to succeed in the upcoming weeks, and your manager was not meant to, penalize you, reduce your salary, screw up your performance report. So, we had to build this bond, and I don't think it's just something that you can depend on to come naturally. It has to evolve.
Yeah, I think the managers were the first people who had to make a really major adjustment in this area because you're there to listen. The retro is to collect as much information as possible, and then that information is so valuable, you improve your team with that information. So you can judge, you can jump on a solution while you're talking to, while your boss is expressing what's happening. You do need to be patient, and you do need to listen, most importantly. And at the end of it all, it probably isn't you that comes up with the solution. You need to let the team make their decision. So first and foremost, the manager has to let go and allow the team to work through the process and come up with solutions on their own because it's their world right now. It's what they need to improve. But the other part was that we wanted people to talk, and I was talking. People didn't want to talk. People maybe didn't want to express what was going on, and it's a hard habit to break of how we used to operate before. So just positive reinforcement, asking questions in a way where you are just asking questions. You're not trying to pinpoint or put blame on people. You're encouraging conversation. And of course, that conversation leads to positive outcomes. And you want to show that that's what's happening. You want to point out that's what's happening. So creating a really, really positive environment that is designed for conversations, which then of course they lead to solutions. But that initial part where we're just talking, that had to be created to the management, taking a step back and letting the team do what they have to do.
We've got a couple more. We'll probably wrap up at the 10, just to let you guys know. But we're very close to the end here. The backlog. This is your requirement backlog. It's basically your infinitely long to-do list, and it tells the development team what the priorities are next. Now, creating a requirement list or a backlog is not overly challenging. However, in the agency setting, typically you have to have a product team working on multiple projects simultaneously. If you're lucky, you have one or two. If your clients are a little bit smaller, you might have to balance between 3 or 4 ongoing projects at any given time. Now, we found that Scrum, the Agile values, the principles, and even a lot of the coaches would tell us that we're crazy to try to manage multiple products with one product team. However, the reality of our business model is we just have to do it. So this challenge is actually around how do you take the priorities and the requirements from multiple projects that you're working on simultaneously, and how do you bring them into one list, which is what's prescribed by the actual methodology.
So as Chris described before, the way our team is structured is with co-managing teams. We have a PO working with a PM. PO working with the client on the vision of the product and how to bring the value in. And the PM is focused on money and time. Both aspects and both perspectives are extremely important. So what happens is that before a sprint is created, the managers would meet and talk about each individual project, whether it's from the perspective of what the client wants or time and budget, because all three are very important. And they would negotiate, they would discuss of what they feel needs to happen or to make client happy, the sprint is success, and obviously what is the team capable of. So they would be the ones who handle those conversations. And Hmm.
The next one here is requirements. So we mentioned earlier that the business know-how is now at the forefront of the developers, the product owner, and the PM's mind, which meant that our requirements can no longer look the same. We used to look at specification lists, 500 to 1,000 items long, that said, our software must have a WYSIWYG editor, we must have a workflow, it must have these user roles, and so on. It was extremely prescribed, fixed in scope. Now all of a sudden our requirements were different. We wanted to start solving business problems. We wanted to walk away from solving feature lists and being committed to, and dedicated to hitting a specifications list. So we had to change the way that we were documenting our requirements to make them more businessy.
Hmm. And most importantly, we need to have a language that's universal that can be started with the client and then transferred to the dev. So there is a format called stories, I already mentioned it, where it's a statement that is, as a user, I want to do this, so then I have to solve. That story is the start of a requirement. And then the PO would work with the client and have conversations to understand what it is that goes a little bit deeper of this requirement. And he would outline acceptance criteria, which are slightly more detailed than just one broad statement. When this is brought to the development team, this block statement again is how the requirement is communicated. Gives them the idea of what the client is looking for. And then through the acceptance criteria, they would map out the technical roadmap of how this is going to be built out. But it's really important because, again, it's a telephone. Client tells something to field then needs to tell the team, and the team then needs to make a decision on how this is being done. So keeping a language that everyone understands throughout this process is extremely important so that the end result actually matches what the client is doing.
And looking at the clock, we're at the 10. So we have a couple other challenges here. If you're interested, we're actually going to be around for a little bit longer, and then we have a 6-hour drive home. So, come see us. We were going to talk about how do you prioritize your requirements, how do you estimate effectively, and then finally, what tools is it that we use to implement Agile. So if you're interested at all, come see us at the booth. I'd be remiss to not tell you that we are opening an office in Albany. So if you are a developer, a PM, or a PO looking for a new job or switching career, please come see us. We're extremely excited. We've got some great clients in the area that you would be working with. Anyway, thanks so much, guys. We're right out there if you want to chat later. Because you were good.
Yeah.